Tonight, 3 years of war and now a pivotal moment for the future of Ukraine and for Europe. And it all hangs on what this man does next, Donald Trump. Today he met the French president in Washington. Next, attempting delicate diplomacy. Prime Minister Keir Starmer, his message to Ukraine, we are with you. Plus,
I still wait for him to come back home every day, even though I saw his body.
Inside Russia, we hear from a grieving mother now daring to criticize Vladimir Putin after her son was killed in battle.
The military graves are the ones marked out by flags, and there are dozens and dozens of them. And this is just one cemetery in one town, in one region.
So what could peace in Europe look like? And will the war only end if Ukraine signs over its minerals to the US? And what does the British Prime Minister need to do when he gets in the room with Donald Trump? We'll be discussing that later in the programme. And a Conservative win and huge gains for the far right, everything you need to know about the German elections. That's all coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Good evening. We've heard one phrase quite a lot today: a just and lasting peace. It was repeated over and over by Europe's leaders in Ukraine. They were all in Kiev to mark 3 years of war. But we know, if the past month is anything to go by, it's not what they say that matters. Volodymyr Zelensky may offer to resign. Vladimir Putin may insist he won't accept NATO peacekeeping forces in Ukraine. But it's what Donald Trump does next that will make the real difference. And if any image symbolizes this new world order the US president is intent on creating, it's this. The UN General Assembly today, America voted with Russia, Belarus and North Korea against a resolution condemning the invasion of Ukraine. Caught up in all of this are the Ukrainian people, displaced from their homes. More than 12,000 civilians killed and reportedly more than 45,000 soldiers. The fatalities are rising for Russia too, as is the strain on the economy. Tonight we'll discuss what a just and lasting peace could look like. But let's get started in Washington, where the French and the US president met today. Have a listen to what both men said afterwards.
Will you convince Vladimir Putin to accept the European troops as peacekeeper, would you think?
Yeah, he will accept that.
He will accept
I've
it?
asked him that question.
You talked to me?
I've asked him that question.
Is
Said
France
yes?
going to lift the block on the
Because
300 billion?
look, if we do this deal, he's not looking for more war. He doesn't mind, but I've specifically asked him that question. He has no problem with it.
Today's discussion showed several areas of progress. First, we have been working a great deal with President Zelensky to have a proposal that's acceptable to Ukraine. President Trump has confirmed that he will be meeting with President Zelensky very soon to finalize the agreement on critical minerals and rare earths and to speak together about that matter. That's a very important step forward. The second thing is that during our discussions, we were able to go into some of the details about the proposal that we have just made. France and several other European countries, along with Ukraine, are hard at work.
French President Emmanuel Macron there with Donald Trump. Well, let's go straight to our US correspondent, James Matthews, who joins me now. And James, you know, watching these press conferences, listening to some of these statements, seeing the resolution that the United States voted against today, alongside North Korea, Belarus, and Russia. I mean, if you'd said that these things were going to happen 6 months ago, 3 months ago, you know, we would have said unlikely. But this is all unfolding today.
Yeah, Yalda, Donald Trump has changed in the space of a month the way the world does business. We had this news conference here, two separate news conferences with a meeting in between. And, you know, you can isolate that really from the wider context. You mentioned events up the road at the United Nations, whereby the United States voted against a resolution that would describe Russia as the aggressor, against a resolution that spoke of the withdrawal of Russians from Ukrainian territory. And yet you had this meeting, two men standing side by side, talking up their meeting and the product of it, suggesting that they are indeed on the path towards peace. I suppose that is politics. Macron, he described it as a turning point, spoke about how they got into discussion about an American security guarantee and said that if America was part of any agreement, then that would lend strength, because should the Russians violate such an agreement, then they would violate an agreement with America as the backstop. Trump said his people are talking to Putin, that he believes Russia is going all out to make sure the war is ended. He spoke about being a man who does deals. I do deals. It's what I do. They want to end this war, talking about the Russians. Macron, for his part, he called this an existential issue for Europeans. And interestingly, significantly, I thought, standing beside Donald Trump, he said this peace must not mean a surrender of Ukraine or a ceasefire without guarantees. It must allow for Ukrainian sovereignty and allow Ukraine to negotiate with other stakeholders. We're aware, of course, Yalda, that Ukraine was not at the table with America and Russia and Saudi Arabia, and there is this discussion around sovereignty. You know, does Russia retain the land it has already taken? A very pointed remark there, I thought, by Macron, who clearly sees this, in his words, as a turning point. I suppose time will tell on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, in this whole idea of deal making, Ukraine has attempted to sort of offer an olive branch through its rare earth minerals to somehow, you know, get the US president to sit up and for him to feel as though, okay, well, you know, we're getting something back for what we've invested.
Yeah, Donald Trump has put that at the very heart of this, hasn't he, Yalda? I remember I was here 2 years ago when Zelensky came here, was received by Biden, very much a frontline hero, applauded by all, addressed a joint session of Congress and so on. That's turned. Donald Trump has reframed Zelensky as the guy who is ripping America off, talks about consistently the money that America's spending for what he would say is little reward. He's focused, therefore, on this deal. This transactional president sees the trillions of dollars in this rare mineral deal, you know, minerals that Ukraine has underground, can service electric vehicles and so on. Therein lies the cash. Therein lies the deal that Donald Trump is after, and he's tied it into Ukraine's security guarantees. The Americans are talking about this deal being signed imminently. Zelensky will come here to sign that deal, so we expect him in due course. The question is, you know, can Ukraine and European allies trust Donald Trump, even if that deal is signed? Before Macron arrived here today, minutes before he entered the building, Trump posted on Truth Social about discussions, serious discussions, he said he was having with Putin about economic development deals and how that was going very well. So Donald Trump, the deal maker, is playing both sides on this one. And the concern for Ukraine and European allies will be, you know, where do his loyalties lie? Principally to himself, of course. The question is, how does he balance the interests of Russia with the interests of Ukraine and others?
Yeah, absolutely. Huge questions being asked tonight on this third anniversary of the start of the war in Ukraine. James, thank you so much for all of your analysis there. Well, as you've been hearing, Donald Trump suggested this evening that he could meet the Ukrainian president this week or next, and that a deal on US access to Kyiv's minerals would be signed soon. After 3 years of conflict, most Ukrainians want the war to end, but would peace at any cost be better than no peace at all? Here's our security and defense editor, Deborah Haynes.
We hereby commence the commemorative ceremony of
a growing tribute to those who made the ultimate sacrifice for their country.
the European Council.
Ukraine's president, with his Western allies, pay their respects and pause to remember. The leaders then gather in person and via video link in a show of strength against Vladimir Putin and of solidarity in the face of increasingly divisive rhetoric from the White House.
We must do everything in our power to enable Ukraine to secure a just and lasting peace.
No one wants more peace than the Ukrainian people, but they want a just and a lasting peace.
President of the European Council.
Their goal all too clear, and Donald Trump says he wants peace too. But the absence of any public message from him at this summit to mark the 3rd anniversary of Russia's war points to a differing in views on how it can be achieved. Volodymyr Zelensky needing all his partners to be on side.
We hope that we can finish this war this year, not in 3 years. It's very, very difficult. Very difficult for all our nation to go through this war.
Here we go.
This was the moment Ukraine's worst nightmare began. Explosions across the country as Moscow's forces attacked. Exactly 3 years ago, Russian missiles slammed down on this city. The air raid sirens sounded and the country was plunged into crisis. Back then, the United States stood squarely behind Ukraine against Russia. Today, with Donald Trump once more in the White House, it's far less clear where America's loyalties lie. One man who knows both the American and Ukrainian leaders well is Britain's former Prime Minister.
It's ghastly to hear some of the language that's been coming from Washington about who started the war and Zelensky being a dictator. All this, we all know that those are complete untruths. But I remain actually optimistic about Ukraine and about their chances of success.
For Ukraine's people, most want an end to the fighting and a chance to rebuild their lives. We visit some temporary accommodation outside Kyiv, funded by an American donor. It shelters dozens of families forced to flee their own homes because Russia now occupies the land where they once lived.
Let them take their troops and leave. The war will end immediately. All of this chaos will end. That's my opinion.
A complete Russian withdrawal is something the White House has called unrealistic. But these people aren't giving up hope.
And Deborah joins us live from Kyiv this evening. And Deborah, at the very beginning of this conflict, many of us journalists, headed to Ukraine to cover this. And I think what really resonated and what was quite clear was that the Ukrainian people were not going to give up on their country. President Zelensky was offered an exit from the country. And he said, I don't need a ride. I need help to defend my country. Now these sorts of statements that we're seeing coming out of the White House and these discussions and negotiations taking place between Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, the Americans and the Russians. Just give us a sense of, how the Ukrainian people are reacting. I know you ended your report there with the Ukrainians don't intend on giving up. I mean, is that the sense right across the board, or are people also feeling a sense of helplessness and hopelessness?
Yeah, I mean, as you can expect, the opinions differ, but everyone is absolutely united in wanting this war to end. Of course, there are many that want to ensure that there is a just end to the war. We visited a cemetery inside Kyiv, this sprawling cemetery that's still expanding with war graves, with row upon row of Ukrainian soldiers' graves stretching out into the distance, and the starkest possible reminder of what's at stake, the lives that are at stake. And the faces from the photographs staring out from these graves were of young men, so many young men that have given up their lives to fight for their country, to defend their land, not to see it handed over to Russia on some kind of trumped-up deal that doesn't benefit Ukraine. And so I think that's what people here in the majority really want, is not just an end to the fighting, but a just end to the fighting, and an assurance that some kind of deterrence is going going to be put in place so that Vladimir Putin doesn't attack again. And unless the US is on board and supporting Ukraine in that, then it really does feel as though this country could be very exposed. And if it's left with some kind of deal that then exposes it to further aggression from Russia, there's going to be not just unhappiness here, but huge anger, I can imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. Deborah, thank you so much. Well, circumstances have flipped in Vladimir Putin's favour in recent weeks, with Russia brought in from the cold by the Trump administration that has decidedly called on Ukraine. But no matter how the war has been presented to Russians, 3 years of fighting have taken a heavy toll. Our Moscow correspondent Ivor Bennett spoke to a mother who lost a son on the battlefield.
Around Moscow, you see the word victory. Victory will be ours, this sign reads. But do peace talks still count as a win? The Kremlin's war in Ukraine wasn't supposed to last this long. 3 years that have seen Russia itself invaded. But the mood in Moscow is triumphant. Relations with the US are thawing and currents shifting in Russia's favour. Nothing will feel like a victory for Yelena, though, no matter how the war ends. Her 18-year-old son, Valentin, was killed in Russia's Kursk region in September, soon after Ukraine's incursion there.
Sometimes I sit and think who my grandchildren could have been. It's impossible to live like this. It's very hard for me to be without him. I still wait for him to come back home every day, even though I saw his body. I still can't believe it. I want all mothers to see their children come home.
Yelena made this video in memory of Valentin, who she says was excited to do his military service. The Kremlin promised conscripts wouldn't be involved in combat, but after being sent to the border, the war came to him.
It should be specially trained people there, not children. They were taken from home, from a mother's nest, and brought to some unknown place where there is shooting. What kind of warrior is he? He's not a warrior.
She even wrote to Vladimir Putin, asking for an explanation. But no reply. All she has instead is a grave and her grief. Russia doesn't publish its casualty figures, and it's only when you come to a place like this that you get a sense of the scale of the losses. The military graves are the ones marked out by flags, and there are dozens and dozens of them. And this is just one cemetery in one town in one region. Back in Moscow, honours for those who do return, and an unwavering belief that Russia won't be defeated.
The victory will be significant. The main thing is for this to end quickly. But in any case, we will make every effort to ensure that victory is still ours. No one will take it away from us.
Vladimir Putin appears increasingly confident too. On Defender of the Fatherland Day, a focus on Russia's losses, but it seems gains are now within reach.
And let's go straight to Ivor, who joins us live from Moscow. And, Ivor, frankly, as far as Russia was concerned, this was supposed to be some kind of swift operation. This special military operation was never supposed to reach a 3-year anniversary. And we can see that from the grief of some of the people that you've met. But Vladimir Putin tonight has been also speaking and interviewed by State TV. He's been talking about defence spending. Just help us understand what he was trying to say.
Yeah, some very surprising comments from Vladimir Putin tonight on defence spending that really goes against everything that Russia has been doing these last 3 years, waging war in Ukraine. He suggested in this interview with state television, Russian state TV, inside the Kremlin, that it would be a good idea for both Washington and Moscow to agree to defence spending cuts by as much as 50%. As I say, seemingly came out of the blue, presented as kind of off-the-cuff comments from the Kremlin leader, but I think this was actually a specific attempt to remind the US and remind Donald Trump of what Vladimir Putin and Russia have to offer if the White House continues to side with them in these peace negotiations over the war in Ukraine, because that wasn't the only thing that Vladimir Putin kind of put on the table tonight. He also suggested that Russia could do a deal with the US on Russia's rare earth metals production. He said, obviously we know that the US is trying to do a deal with Ukraine on this topic, which is proving a little difficult. Kyiv still yet to agree with what Donald Trump has proposed. But this was an attempt, I think, by Russia to offer a contrast there and say, look, you can do a deal with us, no problem, on our rare earth metal reserves. Also on aluminium production, he said that the US and Russia could work together on production in Siberia, but the most significant suggestion and proposal here were these defence spending cuts. We know Donald Trump likes to present himself as a peacemaker, so this could be the biggest prize of them all. And as ever with Vladimir Putin, I think the timing is deliberate. He timed these comments, well, he certainly made them, at the same time as Donald Trump was holding this joint press conference in the White House with Emmanuel Macron. Perhaps Vladimir Putin felt that the US president might be swayed by his French counterpart, because this felt like an attempt by the Kremlin to drown France out. So now Donald Trump has the Kremlin on one shoulder, inside one ear, and Europe on the other, and everyone, the world is watching to see which way Donald Trump turns.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Ivor, thank you so much. You're watching The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Stay with us. We've got lots more coming up on the programme. With shifting diplomacy comes a shifting battlefield. We'll have expert analysis of Ukraine's war map 3 years in.
I'm James Matthews, and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C. Do you fear a fourth indictment? Is it a drug? Does your government owe an apology to the British home children? Great to see you. Does your government owe them an apology? The fact that they were intercepted, does that indicate a military weakness on the part of Iran? No. Free, wherever you get your news. There's no doubting the strength of this hurricane as it roars through. You can feel a devastating power. It had been a difficult night in a deadly storm.
Bang, bang. You can hear it hitting the windows.
Our houses are okay.
It's depressing.
As bad as all of this is, it could have been much worse. Today, this land they call sacred is at the heart of America's electric car revolution.
To me, it's a sacred ground.
The white gold rush is a race that Biden doesn't want to lose. I've covered some of the biggest stories in the world. Donald Trump, 45th President of the United States, it would appear is about to learn his fate.
Escort coming out!
San Quentin houses America's largest death row. They rarely allow cameras onto the condemned block.
James Matthews, Sky News. I want to be treated equally like everyone else.
It's one step closer to getting out, to getting off death row.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Mr. Trump, James Matthews from Sky News.
Hey, James.
You're diminished by claims that you're a racist.
The question?
Mr. Musk, has your ignorance and ego cost Ukrainian lives? Vladimir Putin calls you outstanding. What do you call him, sir?
He's from Sky News. He's entitled to ask me questions.
Mandatory evacuation. You must leave.
For many people, Harvey is far from over.
People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away? Sky News, the full story first.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people.
Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised.
If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem. Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
Welcome back. Let's turn now to the battlefield. If the US were willing to continue military support, the Ukrainian army could, in theory, keep on fighting. But it's not that simple. Our military analyst, Michael Clark, and our data and forensics correspondent, Tom Cheshire, had this assessment of what could happen next. Have a look.
This shows the average number, the daily number of long-range drones launched by Russia, according to Ukraine. You can see, down from 11 in June. It's just been this really, really big increase. February, the largest yet. This has been, a really contested space, a really deadly and fatal space too.
Yeah, and the point about this, Tom, is that this is only an index of something else, because the drones aren't the main threat. In a way, the drones are there to act as distractions, as decoys, to open up holes in Ukraine's air defence.
They tie up air defence.
Through which ballistic missiles and glide bombs come through. And so the increase in drone attacks is a symbol of the fact that they've increased attacks in all forms of aerial warfare. For 3 winters in a row, they've tried now to actually bring Ukraine to a halt, to attack the energy grid, to attack the infrastructure, to attack civilian targets. This winter's been the worst of all, but still the Ukrainians have so far withstood it.
The next question becomes, how long can Russia sustain it? Again, we'd always talk about how long Ukraine can sustain it, but let's look at the Russian economy. Interest rates at 21%, inflation in January at 9.9% officially.
Yeah, that's the official figure. Nobody believes it. I mean, economists reckon that inflation, real inflation, is well over 20%. I mean, if inflation wasn't 20%, interest rates wouldn't be 21%. The Russian economy, it's not going to collapse like a house of cards, as some people say, because it is built on state-created credit at the moment. But it is under strain. It is creaking. 40% of all government spending is going on defence, and more will go on it next year. They're cutting down on welfare payments. The market is shrinking. Investment is not very good. So if the Russians had to keep going like this for another 12 months, they would be in some economic trouble. They can keep going because it's a dictatorship. And if people are unhappy about it, there's not much they can do about it.
Well, and that is the question, is what happens next in this conflict? The political landscape is changing a lot, especially in terms of what other nations might offer, especially troops on the ground. So we'll go through some of those plans in a potential peace scenario. Basically calls for around 110,000 troops there as what's called a reassurance force. That's what the troops are needed in Ukraine. Is that feasible?
Well, this is the figure that President Zelensky said would be required to man a ceasefire line, because this would be the longest ceasefire line in history, the longest peacekeeping line in history, bar none. I mean, Ukraine's a very big country. And he said you need 110,000 troops. In fact, you would need 3 times that number, because for every group of troops you have on the line, you have another group waiting to go in training, and a group that's just come out that needs to rest and re-roll for something else. So you would have to tie up, whoever provides this 110,000 troops would have to tie up 330,000 troops. And if it was successful, you're talking about having them there for 20 or 30 years.
It's a generational thing. And the plan would be not necessarily to have these at the front line. We'll talk about a different scenario, but it'd be to look after key infrastructure throughout Ukraine. So not on the front line because people are worried about what that would mean, clashes with Russian troops, but looking at things, throughout Ukraine, nuclear sites, airports, seaports, things like that, and keeping those safe.
This will be a different conception, to say, look, we're not trying to put troops on the peacekeeping line. We're trying to maybe offer troops to Ukraine to look after certain critical facilities, to make sure it can continue to function. Because what the Americans say, what Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, says, what Mr. Trump says, is that they want Ukraine to be a sovereign, independent, secure country at the end of all of this. And if so, then certain things have got to be protected, and maybe the Ukrainians could do with some help. That's a possibility. But the Russians have said, we don't want any European troops, certainly not NATO troops as NATO, but even European troops on a bilateral basis. We don't want any of them in Ukraine And I think they mean that. I mean, they will not stand for it for all sorts of reasons. There are other ideas around. I mean, one would be to say, why don't we just let the Ukrainians do it? The Ukrainians themselves say, if we had the resources, we'd do it ourselves. We'd look after our own frontier. So one idea is give them the $210 billion, which are frozen Russian assets in Europe. There's 300 odd in the world, but 210 billion of them, roughly, sit in Europe. Give them those assets, let them buy whatever they want, and then they can do it themselves. That's one idea. Another idea, interestingly, is to say, just declare it to be the frontier. No peacekeeping troops, no reassurance troops. That is the frontier. With this interesting rider, that's our new interim frontier. If the Russians take one step over it, we will give Ukraine instant and unconditional membership of NATO. Now, that idea is simple, elegant, and very, very scary to all of the leaders in the Western world, not least in Washington.
And that is, where so much this is so important. As you said, it's been a stagnant front line in terms of on the ground, but everything else is shifting. It seems to shift with every summit, with every post on X. It really is all in the balance. Michael Clark, thank you very much for that analysis. It's a crucial few weeks, months into the spring for Ukraine.
That was Tom Cheshire and Michael Clark there. Well, I've been speaking to Natalia Galibarenko, who's Ukraine's ambassador to NATO. I started by asking if the past couple of weeks had been among the most difficult for Ukraine. Have a listen.
Now I believe it's some kind of a crucial moment, both at the battlefield, but also on the political dimension. We already stated that we would be glad to finish this war, to have already a peace. But this should be not only ceasefire, it should be a long-lasting and enduring peace. So this is our goal.
Well, let's look at the facts on the table at the moment. President Trump has asked for or the US has asked for a resolution which points to Ukraine, being behind this conflict and launching this invasion, a UN resolution to take that statement out. Donald Trump has also described Volodymyr Zelensky as a dictator. His defense secretary has said that the NATO membership for Ukraine is off the table, although Europeans are saying that he means for now. They've also said that they're not going to give back the land that Russia has taken. So there have been a number of concessions, preemptive concessions that have been made even before these negotiations have begun. Does that concern you, and does that concern Ukraine?
I will call it concessions for the first place, because these are only statements. So these are not the actions, these are the statements. Let us separate like everything. When it was this well-known statement about dictator, the president already, I think, replied in a very good manner to this accusation. He said, if he would have been a dictator, then he would feel insulted. But this is not the case, so there is no field to be insulted or feel other ways. For the resolution at the UN General Assembly, I think just a couple of minutes ago, we got a result from the UN General Assembly, and our resolution got 93 votes. So I think this is a good result. I really believe that it was not constructive, to prepare on the American side an alternative draft. But the most important is that our diplomacy was able to gather support around our draft statement, and 93 votes. I think this is a very good result.
Do you think that if the United States wanted to support Ukraine's path to NATO membership, they would have done so under Biden's administration, for example? And perhaps Donald Trump is just stating the obvious, that Brussels, the United States, were never really willing to give Ukraine NATO membership, that these were just words, and now we're seeing the reality played out?
I can be frank with you, it was exactly the challenge always to speak about our invitation and then membership to NATO with the American administration, and here I mean the previous administration. And we were seriously pushing to obtain at first stage the invitation to NATO without immediate membership. So we even agreed at some point that invitation should come first, and then when the war will be over, so no direct implications for the member states of the conflict with Russia, then we will be ready to negotiate immediate membership. And unfortunately, United States and some other countries were against that. And since NATO is a consensual organization, so actually the countries divided in several camps, supporting Ukraine membership and not supporting Ukraine membership. What I really don't support now, I don't think it's strategically, politically correct. Then we are discussing some kind of a concessions, including NATO membership, now publicly. I think that, it should be more wise to go with a certain set of demands and wishes and needs to the negotiations itself, and then to negotiate directly at the negotiating table.
So do you think the way that the Trump administration is currently handling it is done badly and detrimental to Ukraine?
I don't think they are really have some kind of a bad notion. I don't believe this. I think that Trump and his team, they promised to the people of the United States that they will bring peace to Ukraine. So, and they are trying to deliver. And this is, of course, quite logical. I think that we can both deliver, but it should be another way of doing so.
That was Ukraine's ambassador to NATO speaking to me a little earlier. This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Next up on the programme, a shift to the far right, especially in the East. How Germany's AfD came from the fringes of politics to second place in the weekend election.
I saw police being forceful, pushing young men and women to the ground as they made almost 100 arrests. Will the cold affect your voters?
Well, we have a lot of tremendous support.
Free, wherever you get your news. The people here know that worse storms may well be on their way. I'm Martha Kellner and I'm Sky's US correspondent based here in Los Angeles.
Welcome back to the programme. Germany's Chancellor-in-Waiting, Friedrich Merz, has declared Ukraine must be in a position of strength after his party's victory in the weekend election. The leader of the centre-right CDU came out on top with Germany's best election turnout for 40 years. The far-right AfD stormed into second place, and the SPD, the party of outgoing Chancellor Olaf Scholz, sank to its worst result in decades. This map shows the stark national divide. The CDU is grey, AfD is light blue. Many people in what was East Germany have flocked to the far right, feeling fed up and ignored by mainstream parties. Our Europe correspondent Siobhan Robbins reports.
He is the man tasked with fixing Germany. Friedrich Merz, the likely next chancellor, preparing to make a government in a country where the far right is now the second biggest political force. For many, an unthinkable result after Nazi rule.
The AfD has now doubled its vote share. That is the last warning signal to all the centrist parties in Germany. It means we need to find solutions together.
His preferred coalition partners, the Social Democrats, are still smarting from their worst ever result. There will be no invite for the second place AfD. A so-called firewall prevents pacts with the far right, much to their leaders' frustration.
Is the firewall fair? No, it's completely undemocratic, the firewall. But let's see what's going to happen. Thanks for your question.
A move which Alice Weidel later told journalists ignores the will of the people.
Friedrich Merz has decided to stick to his stance of blocking the AfD. We consider this blockade to be undemocratic. You cannot exclude millions of voters per se.
And who are those voters? The AfD dominated in East Germany, here in Thuringen, getting almost 40% of the votes. Support in part fueled by resentment that 35 years after reunification, wages are still lower than the West and many people feel forgotten.
It's hard to overstate just how shocked some Germans are by these results, but fed up and feeling unheard, people flocked to the far-right AfD, which secured its best ever result, partly by converting non-voters and young people to its cause.
The CDU lost around 1 million voters to the AfD. Party faithful are clear what they need to do to win them back.
It says that we need to work on a lot of problems in Germany, especially on migration, the economy and bureaucracy.
They are attractive to a certain segment of voters, and that needs to be respected. I think the problems that they address need to be solved.
Fail to address these issues, and these could be the final celebrations for Germany's centrists. The far right are waiting in the wings, ready to seize power. Siobhan Robbins, Sky News, Berlin.
Well, I spoke earlier to Mary Khan, a German AfD politician in the European Parliament, whose father sought political asylum in Germany from Pakistan. I began by asking her reaction to the election results.
Yesterday, we achieved the best election result in our young party's history, and we did especially well among young voters, and also reached many people who had never voted before. Voter turnout across Germany was very high. I think it was almost at 80%, which shows we are motivated many former non-voters to take part. And now, my party, we have 24% of seats in the Bundestag with 152 MPs. That means we have doubled our seats, and this is absolutely fantastic. And for East Germany, where I come from, we are now the strongest party. We won 45 out of 48 direct states here. This clearly shows that an AfD government is just a matter of time.
The manifesto of your party, one of the cornerstones of it is to end mass migration. There have been party leaders who have talked about, the invasion of foreigners. They've said things like there is no place for Islam in Germany, for example. Just tell me where you sit on that. And when you talk about, getting rid of mass migration and your party, one of your party leaders talking about remigration, what does that look like?
We are not talking about migrants who are legally here, who work hard, contribute positively, and who became a part of our society. In fact, many people with migration background supporting our party, especially from the Turkish community, and who came in the 1960s, 1970s, but we cannot compare that generation with what happened after 2015. Never before in Germany's history have experienced such an uncontrolled migration. In many cases, we don't even know who exactly is living in our country today.
You talk about the immigrants post-2015 being very different to those who arrived in the country previously. I mean, your father was an immigrant from Pakistan who moved to Germany. So you are, half Pakistani, essentially.
Yes.
Your father later obviously became a German. But what does that sort of re-migration actually look like? Are you saying that all of those people who arrived in the country post-2015 should be sent back?
Only them who don't have a legalized asylum over here. And like I told you, we already have 250,000 who don't have a legal asylum. And about them, we are talking also about this topic of remigration.
So I guess when you talk about your father fleeing political persecution, should Germany have had a responsibility to him?
It was in, it was in 1970s. It was there, you also had an asylum stop in Germany, and very less people got asylum. And in the reason of my father, he only got one because he was Sufi and an ex-Muslim, and it was a political asylum. But when we already talk about about my father, what he did he do, and this is something also what my AfD are saying about. He worked hard and he never depended on welfare. And together with my mother, built a good life for me and my siblings. And he thought us something very important to love Germany and to be deeply grateful for growing up in such a wonderful country, having access to education, enjoying freedom.
There's German MEP from the AfD party, Mary Khan. This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Next up on the programme, the Israeli military offensive in the occupied West Bank that's created what's described as a mini Gaza.
The town famous for a fake grooming scandal.
I did not leave the house for about 3 years.
Had a secret that until recently wasn't known.
Barrow got branded to be a lie in town. It's not. Grooming was happening here.
There were other liars in this town with other secrets.
She is naming men who go on to be convicted of offences against other women and girls.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We'd been warned that we would meet people in the lowest moment of their lives.
Their story is one of fundamental American failure. Well, a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club, but I have to say there are more media here than there are supporters.
We love Trump!
I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too. This is just the audience that Joe Biden wanted.
Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
You know, it's easy to go to politics.
But it's important. It's at the heart of the issue.
For all the talk of a toned-down, humbled Trump, yes, maybe there was just a little less rhetoric, a little less divisiveness, but in the end it was the same rhythm, the same speech, the same man.
All them people that died in Russia and Ukraine, they'd still be alive today if Donald Trump was president.
If it was my wish, have a businessman that's strong like Trump, but maybe just doesn't say as much, you know?
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What we've been allowed to see over here is a humanitarian corridor. Free wherever you get your news.
A young American medical student is making remarkable things happen.
I've seen a lot of difficult things, and honestly, it breaks my heart. These children don't deserve that.
I don't think there's a single Arab I know who isn't seriously disturbed by what's going on.
And so they gathered for this wonder of nature.
I'm very excited right now.
This is an extraordinary moment beyond anything I could have expected. Sky News, get the full story first.
Welcome back. Shortly after the Gaza ceasefire took hold, an Israeli military operation was launched in the occupied West Bank that's created, in one woman's words, a mini Gaza. Israel says it's trying to prevent a repeat of the October 7 attacks, but the UN says 40,000 people have been displaced as buildings and neighbourhoods are demolished. Sky's international correspondent Diana Magnay spoke to families in the northern West Bank in a warning that her report contains the distressing moment a Palestinian boy is shot. He later died in hospital.
A bulldozer in the Tulkarm refugee camp demolishes homes in emptied-out Palestinian neighbourhoods. It's part of Operation Iron Wall, an Israeli military offensive targeting the northern West Bank with airstrikes, house demolitions and door-to-door raids, launched 2 days after the Gaza ceasefire was agreed.
And the Israeli soldiers did this?
Zainab Qasim shows us how Israeli troops ransacked her neighbour's apartment, ripping through their possessions and firing into walls, holding her children at gunpoint.
I have a daughter with special needs. She couldn't understand what was happening or what it means when a weapon is pointed at her head.
I was so scared. I even started crying. I was worried about my brother. They were so aggressive. They were screaming so much.
The family have had to evacuate 3 times since the operation began.
This has become a mini Gaza. If I showed you the streets just behind that door, you would say this is Gaza.
It's not on the scale of Gaza, but critics say the operation is a compensation of sorts to the extremist right wing who didn't want the Gaza war to end and who are holding up Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition. And it has already displaced 40,000 people.
Israel says this is about rooting out militant groups to make sure that another October the 7th doesn't originate from the West Bank. But if you look at the destruction, the fact that they've bombed homes, destroyed the infrastructure, taken out the water systems, the electricity, it looks very much like the ultimate aim is to make it impossible for Palestinians to return.
10-year-old Saddam Rajab was shot 1 week into the operation when he was on the phone to his mother. In CCTV footage, the child screams in pain and struggles to move. His father, who is on crutches, finally reaches him 2 long minutes later.
We called an ambulance. It came and carried my boy. I tried to join him, and before I knew it, 20 to 30 Israeli soldiers turned up. Where they came from, I have no idea. They detained us for almost an hour.
In 2 separate journeys, the ambulances carrying Saddam to hospitals were stopped and searched by the Israeli Defense Forces. Critical time that was lost. He never regained consciousness and died in hospital 2 weeks later. The IDF say they are investigating Saddam's case.
Let's assume their claims that they are fighting armed terrorists. How is a 10-year-old boy an armed terrorist? When his younger sister asks me daily, where is Saddam? I have to make excuses. When my youngest children grow up and learn the details, they'll be filled with resentment.
This conflict continues to claim innocent lives, each tragic case pushing the prospect of peaceful coexistence that bit further away. Donald Trump has said he'll be making a decision on the West Bank in the coming weeks. That is unlikely to account for the millions of Palestinians who call it their home. Diana Magni, Sky News, Tulkarm in the West Bank.
Now, one of the top recording artists of the 1970s, Roberta Flack, has died at the age of 88. Her publicist says she passed away peacefully with family around her. Flack had been battling motor neuron disease. We'll leave you tonight with one of her biggest hits. See you again tomorrow night.
I heard he sang a good song. I heard he had a style. And so I came to see him to listen for a while. And there he was, this young boy, a stranger to my eyes, strumming my bed with his fingers, singing my life with his words, killing me softly with his song, killing me softly with his song, telling my whole life with his words, killing me softly with his song. I felt all flushed with fever,